the Winslow family moved into the old Victorian house with a sense of hope. It was the kind of house that demanded admiration. A wraparound porch with intricate latticework, tall windows that stretched skyward, and most intriguing of all, a cavernous attic. The house was everything the Winslows dreamed of for their growing family, until the noises began. It started on the first night. Jack Winslow, the eldest son at 12 years old, was the first to hear it. A faint, rhythmic creaking, almost like footsteps, paced directly over his bedroom ceiling. He lay frozen in bed, clutching the edges of his blanket. His 9-year-old sister Emma shared the room and was already snoring softly, oblivious. Jack whispered a few times, hoping she'd wake up and validate his fear, but the creaking stopped as suddenly as it had started. Later, during breakfast, as the family shared eggs and toast, Jack ventured to speak up. "Did you hear footsteps last night? From the attic?" The room fell silent. His mother, Beth Winslow, who had been pouring coffee, paused mid-pour. The toddler, Lily, giggled in her high chair but didn't register the tension. Richard Winslow, their father, kept his eyes on the morning paper. "Probably just the house settling," Richard said, in a measured tone that meant the discussion was closed. But Jack caught the flicker of worry in his mother's green eyes before she turned away. He knew she had heard it too. The next week brought more disturbances. Scratches in the walls, the faint sound of humming, shadows shifting even when the attic door was bolted shut. Emma woke one night screaming, shouting that she'd seen someone peering down at her from the vent grate. Lily, too young to articulate much, began pointing toward the ceiling at random intervals, babbling nonsense syllables like, "See ya, bad." The occurrences seemed to intensify, as if the house, or something in it, was responding to their fear. By the third week, Richard finally decided to take action. Old houses make noise, he reassured himself and the family. But when his tools mysteriously disappeared from the garage, only to reappear in the attic's trapdoor entrance, his mild dismissal began to falter. One evening, armed with a flashlight, Richard gathered the courage to open the attic door. Beth, standing behind him, with her hand resting protectively on Emma's shoulder, whispered, "Are you sure we shouldn't just call someone? Like a professional?" Richard didn't respond. The silence stretched as he stood at the base of the ladder, staring into the inky void above. When he finally ascended the creaking steps, the flashlight's beam barely penetrated the thick dust swirling in the air. The attic's interior was larger than he expected, crowded with sunken furniture shapes covered in dusty sheets. Within minutes, Richard shouted down, "Nothing to worry about, just some junk." He climbed back down, visibly relieved. But Jack noticed his dad glancing nervously toward the attic door several times that night. Jack, Emma, and even Beth weren't satisfied with the quick dismissal. Something wasn't right, and they couldn't ignore it any longer. It was Jack's idea to explore the attic alone one rainy Saturday evening. Despite Emma's protests, Jack packed a small flashlight, a notebook, and a pocket knife just in case. Climbing the steps, he felt the air grow colder, oddly damp and sour, like mildew mixed with something that reminded him of meat past its expiration. Fumbling through the darkness, he saw something strange, carvings etched into the wooden attic beams. They weren't the idle graffiti of bored builders. These were symbols like spirals, crude faces, and twisted shapes. They were deliberate, almost ritualistic. And then he saw her. Standing at the farthest edge of the attic, at the threshold of shadows the flashlight couldn't pierce, was the unmistakable outline of a woman. Her head tilted slightly toward him, as though acknowledging his presence. Though her face hid in shadow, her glowing, hollow eyes bored into his heart. Her dress hung in tatters, shredded beyond recognition. She whispered a single word in a voice dripping with venom and sorrow: "Leave." Jack screamed and bolted down the ladder, crashing into Emma and his parents, who had gathered below, drawn by his scream. He babbled incoherently about the woman and the carvings. Determined to uncover the truth, the Winslow family united in their fear. They combed through the attic the next day, guided by Jack's insistence that the carvings were the key to whatever was haunting them. Each discovery brought new horrors: an old photograph of a family that wasn't theirs, names scrawled into the wooden supports, and eventually a rotting, blood-stained wedding veil folded into a box labeled Corinne. Beth's face paled as she whispered, "Corinne Wainwright. She was the first wife of the man who built this house. I read about her in some historical pamphlet at the library." "First wife?" Richard asked. Beth nodded numbly. "She disappeared shortly after their wedding. He claimed she ran off, but there were rumors." Emma uncovered an old diary from a chest nearby, its cover warped but miraculously intact. Flipping through its fragile pages, she stumbled on handwriting that grew more frantic and jagged with each entry. "Henry lied. He lied to me, said the ceremony was for luck, but luck doesn't require this, my blood, my life. He's trying to bind me here. This house burns with my rage. Justice will come when fire cleanses the lie." The passages grew illegible, the last few pages violently torn. A birth date carved into the front cover revealed one horrific truth. Corinne had been only 19, practically a child herself. As they pieced the diary together, the Winslows realized the fury lingering in the attic wasn't some random spectral disturbance. Corinne had been betrayed and murdered, her soul trapped in the house by the very man who vowed to love her. Her growing attacks weren't mindless rage. They were desperate warnings. But warnings weren't enough, as Corinne's hostility deepened into aggression. Richard awoke one night to see her standing at the foot of his bed, her eyes glowing like twin coals, her claw-like hands gripping the mattress. Emma was scratched in her sleep, the marks too deep to dismiss as self-inflicted. The family might have fled the house forever, but the journal entries left in Corinne's broken hand offered a grim ultimatum. "End it. The fire, or your family burns with me." "I think she means we have to burn something," Jack said. "But burn what?" Emma asked, clutching Lily close. In an adrenaline-fueled search that felt torn from the pages of a nightmare, Jack, Emma, and their parents revisited the attic. The search was driven by desperation and determination to end the haunting once and for all. Richard carried a box of matches, their only weapon now that the ghost had all but claimed dominance. After nearly 2 hours of searching, Emma made the final, terrible discovery. Hidden within a false floor panel was Corinne's charred wedding dress, stained deep with crimson. Its fabric seemed to pulse faintly with heat, giving off an energy both sinister and sorrowful. "Her soul's trapped here," Beth whispered. This is what Henry used to bind her." The moment their fingers touched the garment, Corinne materialized out of the shadows. This time, her presence was fully formed, her gown shredded in apparent agony, her hair tangled like vines, her teeth bared in a mix of grief and hatred. "You betray one binding with another," she hissed, "and think fire absolves what fire began?" The final confrontation felt more like battle than exorcism. The family had to physically wrestle with the ghost's icy, snatching hands. Corinne flung objects across the attic, shards of glass, jagged bits of wood. But together, amid screams and crackling energy, they set the gnawed remains of the dress aflame. As the flames spiraled upward, Corinne screamed, a sound that was not entirely inhuman. There was pain in her voice, but also release. Her shadow began to dissolve into the firelight, her vengeful howls fading into mournful whispers. And then she was gone. The Winslow family stood silently for a long while, staring at the charred circle of wood where the garment had burned. The attic no longer felt cold, just empty. The symbols on the walls had vanished, along with the eerie humming. It was over. As they descended from the attic together, exhausted and shaken, but stronger for their ordeal, none of them noticed Lily babbling her nonsense syllables, pointing toward the smudge of soot left above the trapdoor. "See ya," she lisped, her chubby finger tracing letters only she could see, CR.